Alright, so last time we did SOH CAH TOA. If you haven't seen that video yet, I'll leave a bubble up top for you to click to watch it. But what we did is we took two side lengths that we had to find an unknown angle. So using SOH CAH TOA being sine equaling opposite over hypotenuse, cosine equaling adjacent over hypotenuse, and tan equaling opposite over adjacent. Now, today what we're going to do is, instead of looking for the angle, we're going to be looking for a side length if we know one other side length, as well as an angle that's not the 90-degree angle. Alright, so I have an example up on the screen, and I wrote SOH CAH TOA at the top in case you need the memory for it. Now, what we're going to do is the same steps as before. We're going to start off with our angle that and this one we know. We're still going to start off with it, draw an angle right across to find our opposite, and we know the slant is our hypotenuse, so this must be our adjacent. Now we need to find one that uses our opposite and our adjacent, because even though it's an x, we're still going to be using it in this case. And we can see the opposite of adjacent is going to be tan, because it's TOA, O-A. Now we can write out the formula, which is tan theta is equal to opposite, which is 5, over adjacent, which is going to be x. Now, we already know the angle. This theta, we can actually fill in this time to make it tan of 30 is equal to 5 over x. But you're saying we can't do the inverse this time because we have the x there. We don't know what that is. We're trying to find it. So what we can do is, there's a rule that whatever you do to one side of the equation, you can, if you do it to the other side of the equation, it's allowed. So if we want to get rid of the x here, so how would we do that? In order to get rid of a denominator, we have to multiply and make sure it's in the top. So let's say, for example, we have 1/2, and we want to make this equal to 1. How would we be able to do that? Well, if we took our 1 here and we multiplied it by 2, well, now this becomes 2 over 2, which gives us the 1 we want. So what we need to do is whatever we see in the denominator that we want to get rid of, which is the x in this case, we have to multiply it by an x. So we have an x here, and we have to multiply it by x here. And this will cause these two x's to cancel each other out, just like how the 2's would cancel out to give each other the 1. And now we have x multiplied by tan 30 is equal to 5. Well, that's not any good either, because we want the x by itself. But we're going to follow the same rules as we just used with multiplication, but with division. So if you see two things multiplied together, the way to get rid of the one you don't want is by dividing by it. So we have x multiplied by tan 30. And what do we want to get rid of? We want to get rid of the tan 30 so that x can be by itself. So we're going to divide it by tan 30. And instead of this being divided by x, instead of 5 being divided by x, what we're going to do is we're going to divide it by the same thing, tan 30, because that's completely allowed. Now what happens is this tan 30 cancels with this tan 30, and we have our final equation, which is x is equal to 5 over tan 30. Now there's no real trick unless you memorize what tan 30 would be or any trig identity would be, but we're not going to do that today because that just takes practice and you just have to memorize that. There's no trick for it. So instead, we're going to check it in a calculator and see that it approximately equals 8.66. So we know that our x, if let's say this is in centimeters, if this angle is 30 degrees and this height is 5 centimeters, then our x, which is going to be our length in this case, is going to be 8.66 centimeters. Alright, Now we have example number 2, which has our angle being 60 degrees. We have our hypotenuse as 10, we'll put centimeters, and we have this as 6 centimeters, and we have our x as x centimeters. So we're going to look for this side, which is going to be our height. Now we're going to start just like every other one. We're going to go from the angle across. So we know that this is our opposite. We know the slant is our hypotenuse, and we know this is adjacent. Now with this question, we could go different ways about it because we're looking for adjacent. But we have our opposite and hypotenuse, so we can use either one with an A. So that would be either cosine or tan. But since we used tan in the last question, I'm going to use cosine this time. Now we're going to write cos, but we already know our angle, which is going to be cos 60 degrees, is equal to our A, which is our adjacent, so that's going to be x, divided by our h, which is our hypotenuse, which is 10. Now, if you remember, in order to get rid of this denominator, because that's what we want to get rid of, so that the x is by itself, we can multiply it by 10 to cancel them out, but this means we have to multiply this side by 10 as well. And for this one, it's not as tough. There's not 2 steps, it's only 1 step to give us 10 multiplied by cos 60, giving us x. And now just put that in a calculator of 10 multiplied by cosine 60, and we can find that x is going to be equal to 5. Our final example is this triangle with a 45-degree angle. Now we're going to draw the arrow across, label this as opposite, and we know our slant is hypotenuse. And we can stop there. We don't need to find out that this is our adjacent. You can write it if it helps you, but it doesn't really matter because we know we're working with opposite and hypotenuse. Now, you don't really have to get too far because you know it's so, because it's the first one, because you can see the O for opposite right there, and the H for hypotenuse right there. Now, just write the formula of sine 45, because that's our angle, is equal to opposite, which is our x, divided by hypotenuse, which is 8. And just like the cosine example, we want to get rid of this 8 in the denominator, and that means x is all by itself already. We're able to just multiply it by 8 to get rid of both 8's. And what you do to one side, you must do to the other, making this 8 multiplied by sine 45 is equal to x, which I'll write right there, equal to x. And by the way, this little dot means multiplication, in case anyone hasn't seen that before. It means multiplication because when we're working with the x variable, it makes it a lot more difficult because you might get confused which one's x, which one's multiplication, so that just makes it easier for me as well. Now, just plug that into your calculator, 8 multiplied by sine 45, and we will find out that x is approximately, x is 5.66, and we'll put this as centimeters.